Hello and welcome to Renewed Radiance Yoga with Tami. I'm Tami and I'm here today to talk with you about anatomy. This is going to be a gentle introduction to anatomy. It's so important to have some knowledge of your own body structure and your own anatomy as you're working through poses in yoga. It's a great way to help you strengthen your knowledge. The knowledge that you learn here today can be applied to your practice. If you're having any type of blockages, as you're trying to break through new and more challenging poses, avoid injury. Grab yourself a mat. You can practice some of these poses with us. If you'd like to get some blocks and a strap, bring them along as well, and I'll see you back here soon. Welcome back to Beginner's Anatomy. I'm very passionate about this topic for my beginner yogis as well as my ladies going into perimenopause and menopause. Let's be frank, our bodies are changing. And so many times when you're in a group activity, we as human beings have a tendency to look to the person to the right and look to the person to the left and compare ourselves to them. And I hope if you take nothing else away today, I hope that you take away that you are unique, your body is yours, your muscles may be aligned different than someone else's, your structure is similar, but no one is exactly the same. Let's dive in to the world of anatomy. As we venture into the world of anatomy, Colt is going to demonstrate the pose Tadasana for us today. Tadasana is the anatomically correct skeletal structure. It allows your bones to lay naturally with no interference from muscles, tendons, or joints. Another concept that you may hear from your yoga instructor is to stack your bones. What that means is to bring the axis side of your bones, which is the length of your bones, in line with gravity. So as you see, he has his legs long and strong. He's going to demonstrate Uttanasana, forward fold. Go ahead and hinge at your hips, go all the way down. As you can see, Colt is very tight in his hips. He has a tendency to lock out his knees, so I'm going to invite him to microbend his knees. He can always bring his hands onto a block for more stability. And I will encourage him to put more energy into his big toes to push his hips up a little bit higher, drawing your gaze between your legs toward the back of the room. Eventually, with the stacking of this bone, his legs will be long and strong, and he'll use little to no muscle movement to make this happen. A very important part of our body when it comes to yoga poses is our rotator cuff. Our rotator cuff is deep within our body. It's not superficial like our ab muscles. It's really deep in there. It's 4 muscles. It's a hinge socket with a joint and a very shallow socket. That's why people dislocate their shoulder very easily. They can tear the muscles. It's one of the most mobile parts of our body, but it's also one that's most susceptible to injury. So it's so important that we strengthen those muscles so that we can do things like Chaturanga Dandasana, or we can do our inversions. And Colt is going to demonstrate Gomukha Asana, cow face pose. He's going to grab a strap behind him, have it over his shoulder. If you don't have a strap at home, you can always use a tie or a scarf. Lift one of your arms high to the sky, holding the strap perfect. Bend your elbow, reaching your hand down your back body. Take your opposite hand and gently press your elbow down, using your head against the inside of your arm. Feel the lengthening. Look toward me. And then take your other arm, reach it behind your back, and grab the strap. Start to tiptoe your fingers toward each other on the strap. It doesn't matter if they touch or not. Start to draw your chest out toward the front of you, feeling that stretch in your rotator cuff. Feel that stretch across your chest. You can do this pose for 10, 15, 20 seconds at a time, and then you'll want to switch and do the other side, and this will help strengthen your rotator. In addition to our rotator cuffs being so important, our hip flexors are also a super important portion of our body when it comes to yoga poses. One thing I do want to really stress is that remember that our body structures are similar, but they're not the same. And when it comes to our hips and our hip sockets, that's a very important area that we're not all the same. Some people have very deep sockets and some people have very shallow sockets. The more shallow your hip sockets are, the more likely you're able to do things like splits, and the more narrow they are, the tighter you're probably going to feel. So when it comes to splits, which is such an important pose because splits help to strengthen your trunk, they strengthen your quads, your hamstrings, and your calves. Some people never get to the full expression of a split, and that's okay. Remember, you're doing your hard work on your mat. I'm going to show you a pose that will give you the introduction to a split. And to prepare us for a full split, we're going to start with a half split, also known as Humanasana. You can grab blocks if that feels good for you. You can bring them back and forth with you, or you can bring your hands down to the ground. Remember, this is all about strengthening. This is all about preparing. So ground your hands out onto the blocks, look toward the front of the room, and then start to bring your hips back toward your heels, flex your front foot. Take notice if you're feeling there's some compression in your ankle, bone on bone, then just go ahead and let your toes lay gently down. Then you rock yourself right back up, pushing your hips forward, feeling the stretch, reaching your chest up toward the ceiling. As you're doing this back and forth movement, make sure that you lock out your Mula Bandha, which is your energy core, down by your root chakra. It's also near your tailbone. This will keep your bladder area from falling down and keeping your energy inside of you. So just keep going back and forth, slowly reaching. You can even start to hinge at your hips, bringing your chest and your forehead down toward your shin, feeling the stretch. If you feel any tension in the back of your knee, then you need to back out. You should be feeling this stretch in your hamstring, the belly of your hamstring, which is right in the middle of your thigh. And then eventually someday, you may be able to come down to a full split. So far, we've covered our rotator cuffs. Very important component when we're doing yoga. It's our most mobile area of our body and one that we need to add more strength to. We've also talked about our hip flexors and our hip sockets, another important area to strengthen, to become more flexible, to increase our mobility, our balance, and our ability to do poses. The next thing I want to talk about is our knees. As many of you know, I had to have meniscus surgery, as does about 40% of women in perimenopause and menopause. A lot of times for people who are super flexible, this can happen when hyperextension is done in the knee area. Hyperextension is when you lock out your knee. So we have to be really careful on many of our poses to always keep a micro bend in your knee. One example I want to give you is triangle pose. You reach your arms out long, and as you can see, you already have your front leg lengthened. If you're very flexible, you may find the back of your knee is reaching its way down toward the earth. If you feel any tension in your back of your knee, then you're starting to lock out your knee. To protect your knee from that overstretch, from that hamstring overstretch, which will weaken your knees and potentially give you a meniscus tear, put more energy into your big toes, pushing your hips. Again, pulling in your Mula Bandha, pulling in the energy into the trunk of your body and squeezing your thighs toward each other. Reach your arms out to the horizon. Push your back hip to the back of the room. Again, put more energy into your big toe and then windmill your arms down. Again, this is a great way to come into this pose without hyperextending your knee. And then come on out. If you already have a torn meniscus and you're working toward re-strengthening your legs, it's really important to find poses that will give you that support. A lot of times with a meniscus tear, you also lose strength in your quads, in your hamstrings, in your calves, and even in your trunk. So here's a pose, Pita Bandhasana, which is bridge pose. A little bit different than your typical bridge pose is you want your heels to be a bit farther out so there's less pressure on your knees. Draw your hands, palms down by your hips. Draw all your strength into the heels of your feet. Push your hips high to the sky. Pull your knees together. Only go as high as feels comfortable on your knees, and then come back down. Come back up again. This time, squeeze your glutes, squeeze your abs, squeeze your thighs toward each other, and hold as long as you possibly can, and then come back down. This is a great pose to do 10, 15 times a day to continue to strengthen your knees. As your knees become stronger, you can walk your heels closer to your hips, pushing up higher and eventually coming to the traditional bridge pose. As we wrap up our introduction to anatomy today, I have one more topic for you, and that's the topic of fascia. I love this topic. Fascia is such a fascinating part of our body. It's a network of threads that weave their way encompassing your muscles. And just like the old saying, you use it or you lose it, it's so true with your fascia. As we age, as we become less mobile, the fascia tightens, becomes more brittle. We become less mobile, less flexible. Yin yoga is an amazing practice that will help with the health of your fascia by having long poses, 2 to 5 minutes each. So for our final pose today, we're going to do child's pose. Colt is going to reach toward the top of his mat, bending forward, bring his chest and his forehead, keeping his hips down. If he was not able to get his forehead down to the mat just yet, he can always stack his hands and use them. Or if he's got a block handy, he can always rest his forehead. Now, this is one modification of Badasana, which is child's pose. Another way to really get a good hip opener is bring your big toes to touch, open your knees wide, and start to drop your hips down even farther. Look, he's very flexible in his hip flexors. Draw your hands closer to the top of your mat, feeling a good stretch in your rotator cuff. Forehead down on the mat. This is a great yin yoga pose to open your fascia. Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you in the future.